The snow fell in thick curtains, muffling every sound until the world became nothing but white silence and cold wind. I watched from the mouth of the cave as figures moved through that whiteness, dark shapes against the pale curtain, carrying bundles and guiding children toward the rocky overhang that would become our home. They moved with purpose, unhurried but deliberate, people who had done this many times before. My name is Owen, and I was the stranger among them, the outsider who had stumbled into their world with nothing but the clothes on my back and questions I didn't yet know how to ask. What I didn't know that first day was that this cave, these people, and the long winter ahead would teach me what it truly means to be human. I had come from the lowlands, from green valleys where winter meant rain and occasional frost, not this endless white that buried everything and transformed the landscape into something unrecognizable. I had been traveling with a small group of traders, following rumored paths to northern settlements where furs and amber could be exchanged for tools and grain. But we had started too late in the season, pushed our luck too far, and when the first real storm hit, we were scattered. I lost sight of my companions in the blinding snow, and wandered for what felt like days, though it might have been only hours. Time loses meaning when you're freezing and lost. If you want to hear stories of survival, of ancient peoples and the wisdom they carried, of how humans learned to live in the harshest places on Earth, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. These stories remind us of what we're capable of the knowledge we've lost and the connections that make us human. When they found me, I was barely conscious, huddled against a boulder, my lips blue and my fingers numb beyond feeling. I remember a face appearing through the snow, weathered and calm, eyes that assessed me without judgment. Strong hands lifted me, and I was carried, though I had no strength to help or resist. I drifted in and out of awareness, catching glimpses of movement, hearing voices in a language I didn't understand, feeling warmth gradually returning to my limbs in painful waves. I woke inside the cave, wrapped in furs that smelled of smoke and animal, surrounded by the quiet sounds of people going about their tasks. The cave was larger than I had first realized, the ceiling lost in shadows above, the walls rough stone that still held ancient marks and paintings. A fire burned in the center, its smoke rising to find some natural chimney in the rock above. Around the fire, people worked, spoke softly, tended children, prepared food. They moved with the easy familiarity of family, of people who knew each other deeply and depended on each other completely. A woman appeared beside me, her face lined with years but her eyes bright and alert. She offered me a wooden bowl containing something warm and fragrant, a broth made from meat and herbs I couldn't identify. I took it with shaking hands and drank, feeling the warmth spread through my chest and belly. She watched me drink, nodded once, and moved away to other tasks. No questions, no demands for explanation. Just simple care offered to someone who needed it. Over the next few days, as my strength returned, I began to understand the community I had stumbled into. There were perhaps 30 people in total, ranging from infants to the very old, 3 generations living together in this stone shelter. They were not primitive in the way I had been taught to think of ancient peoples. They were skilled, knowledgeable, adapted to their environment in ways that put my own survival skills to shame. The leader was a man named Grom, though I didn't learn his name until later. He was perhaps 50 winters old, his hair gray and tied back, his body lean and strong from a lifetime of physical work. He spoke little, but when he did, everyone listened. His authority came not from force, but from proven wisdom, from decisions that had kept the group alive through countless winters. He was the one who had found me in the snow, who had made the instant decision to carry me back rather than leave me to die. The woman who had given me broth was called Mira, and she was Grom's sister, a healer and keeper of plant knowledge. She knew which roots could reduce fever, which leaves could be chewed for pain, which fungi were food and which were poison. She moved through the cave with quiet efficiency, always aware of who needed attention, who was struggling, who needed a kind word or a firm instruction. There was a young man named Tor, perhaps 20 winters, who became my guide and teacher in those early days. He had been born in the lowlands, as I had, but his family had joined this group when he was a child. He remembered enough of the southern tongue to communicate with me, though his accent was strange and many words came slowly. He showed me where to sleep, how to help with daily tasks, what was expected and what was forbidden in this close-knit community. The eldest among them was a man so old his exact age was unknown even to himself, called simply Elder by everyone. His face was a map of wrinkles, his hands gnarled like tree roots, but his mind was sharp and his memory vast. He sat near the fire most of the day, sometimes working on small carvings, sometimes simply watching, and in the evenings he told stories. I would come to understand that he was the living library of the group, the keeper of knowledge accumulated over generations. There was also a man named Karn, younger than Grom but older than Tor, who watched me with suspicious eyes in those first days. He said little to me directly, but I felt his gaze often, assessing, judging, deciding whether I was worth the food I consumed and the space I occupied. His skepticism was not personal, I would learn, but practical. Resources were limited, and every mouth to feed was a calculation of survival. And there were children, half a dozen ranging from toddlers to near adolescents. Among them was a girl of perhaps 8 winters named Lyra, who had lost her parents to sickness the previous year and been adopted by the group as a whole. She was curious about me, this strange man from the lowlands, and often sat nearby watching as I learned new skills, sometimes giggling at my clumsy attempts, sometimes offering encouragement in words I was beginning to understand. As the snow continued to fall outside, sealing us into the cave for what Tor told me could be many weeks, I began to learn the rhythms of winter life in this place. The cave was not just shelter, but a complete world, organized and efficient. The space near the entrance was coldest and used for storage of meat and other foods that needed to stay frozen. Further in, where the fire's warmth reached, was the living area where people worked and gathered. At the very back, in the warmest and most protected space, were the sleeping areas, sectioned off with hanging furs to create small private spaces for families. The fire was the heart of everything, never allowed to go out, tended constantly by whoever was nearby. Fuel was precious, carefully rationed from the supply of wood and dried dung they had gathered before the snows came. I learned to tend the fire properly, to add just enough fuel to maintain warmth without waste, to position stones around it to radiate heat more efficiently, to use the coals for cooking. It was a skill that seemed simple but required constant attention and understanding. Food preparation was a communal activity, with different people contributing different skills. The women mostly did the close work of cutting and seasoning, while men handled the heavy tasks of butchering and hauling. But these divisions were flexible, based more on current ability than rigid rules. I watched Mira teach younger women the properties of various herbs, saw Grom show boys how to sharpen stone tools, observed the way knowledge flowed between generations like water-finding channels. Sleep, I discovered, was different here than anything I had known. In the lowlands, I had slept alone on a bed of straw, wrapped in a single blanket, behind walls that kept out weather but also connection. Here, in the cave, sleep was communal. Families clustered together, sharing warmth, bodies pressed close in the deep cold. Children slept between adults, the elderly wrapped in extra furs and positioned nearest the fire, everyone contributing their body heat to the collective warmth that made survival possible. Tor explained to me one evening, as we prepared our sleeping space, that this closeness was not just practical but essential. In the deep winter, he said, speaking slowly so I would understand, the cold can kill even inside the cave. Alone, you freeze. Together, you live. This is the oldest law. He showed me how to arrange furs, how to position yourself to maximize warmth, how to share breath and heat with those around you. It was intimate in a way that made me uncomfortable at first, raised as I had been to value privacy and independence. But I had no choice, and as the days passed and the cold deepened, I came to understand and even appreciate this necessary closeness. I slept between Tor and an older man named Bron, our backs pressed together, sharing furs and warmth through the long, dark hours. In sleep, we were vulnerable together, trusting each other with our lives in the most literal sense. It built bonds stronger than any words could forge. The rhythm of days in the cave was measured not by the sun, which we rarely saw, but by sleep and wake, hunger and satisfaction, tasks completed and tasks pending. We woke in darkness, the fire built up from coals, and began the day's work. There was always work, endless small tasks that kept the community functioning, repairing tools, processing hides, carving bone and antler into useful objects, telling stories to children, checking food stores, tending the sick or injured. 1,000 things that required skilled hands and patient attention. I was given simple tasks at first, things that even someone with my limited skills could manage. I helped scrape hides clean of fat and tissue, learning to use the stone scrapers efficiently without damaging the leather. I helped carry snow to melt for drinking water, understanding quickly why it was important to use clean snow from a safe distance from the cave entrance. I helped mind the younger children while their parents worked, learning their games and their language, earning their trust and affection. What surprised me most was how much there was to learn, how deep the knowledge ran. These were not simple people living simple lives. They were sophisticated survivors, masters of a complex environment, possessing skills and understanding accumulated over countless generations. Every task had nuance, every tool had history, every technique had been refined through trial and error over centuries. Elder was the greatest teacher, though his lessons came in the form of stories told in the evening darkness, with only the fire's light illuminating his ancient face. Through Tor's translation, I began to understand the deep time these people carried, the sense of connection to ancestors stretching back beyond memory. He told of the first people who found this cave, fleeing some disaster in the lowlands, seeking refuge in the mountains, and learning to survive through desperation and innovation. They did not know how to live in snow, Elder said one night, his voice like wind through trees. They came with summer knowledge, and winter almost killed them. Many died that first year, but those who lived learned. They learned that snow can be shelter, that cold can preserve food, that darkness is for sleeping and conserving strength. They learned to watch animals, to see how bear sleeps through winter, how rabbit changes color with seasons, how bird flies south and returns. Every creature was a teacher. He told of the discovery of fire-making, not as a single invention, but as knowledge earned through desperate need. The ancestors saw lightning strike trees, saw how fire could warm and light and transform food. But catching lightning is impossible. So they watched and wondered, tried many things, failed many times. Until one day, someone rubbing sticks to straighten them noticed heat, noticed smoke, noticed the birth of ember. That knowledge spread like fire itself, changing everything. The way elders spoke made even practical survival knowledge feel sacred, connected to something larger than individual lives. I began to understand that for these people, there was no separation between physical survival and spiritual meaning. The techniques that kept them alive were also the bonds that made them a people, the stories that gave them identity, the practices that connected them to ancestors and descendants alike. As the days passed into weeks, I felt myself changing in ways subtle but profound. My hands grew calloused from working with tools and hides. My body adjusted to the constant cold, learning to conserve heat and move efficiently. My ears attuned to the language spoken around me, and I began to understand more without translation, to speak simple phrases myself, to participate more fully in the life of the group. But the deeper changes were internal. I was learning to think differently, to value different things, to measure success by different standards. In my old life, I had valued individual achievement, accumulation of goods, standing apart from others through superior skill or wealth. Here, those values were meaningless. What mattered was contribution to the group, reliability, the ability to work with others, the willingness to share knowledge and resources. Selfishness was not just discouraged, but impossible in a situation where everyone's survival depended on cooperation. One day, perhaps a month after my arrival, though I had lost clear count of time, Grom called me over to where he was working on a spear. He examined me for a long moment, then handed me a piece of antler and a stone tool. Through gestures and simple words, he showed me how to carve, how to feel the grain of the material, how to work with it rather than against it. It was the first time he had directly taught me anything, and I understood that this was a sign of acceptance. I was no longer just a burden to be tolerated, but a member of the group to be trained. I worked on that piece of antler for days, carving it slowly into a spear point under Grom's occasional guidance. My hands were clumsy, my cuts uncertain, but gradually the shape emerged. When it was finished, rough but functional, Grom took it, examined it closely, and nodded. "You are learning," he said simply. Then he attached it to a shaft and handed the completed spear back to me. "This is yours. You made it. It will serve you." Simple words, but they carried weight. I was no longer dependent on borrowed tools. I had created something myself, contributed something real to the community's resources. That night, as the snow continued to fall outside and we gathered around the fire for the evening meal, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time since arriving, I didn't feel like a guest or a burden. I felt like I belonged. It was a small moment, unmarked by ceremony or announcement, but profound in its quiet way. I had crossed some invisible threshold from outsider to insider, from stranger to member. The meal that night was simple, as all meals were. A stew made from dried meat, roots, and herbs, served in wooden bowls carved smooth from years of use. We ate in comfortable silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the wind outside. After eating, Elder began another story, and we settled in to listen, full and warm and together. Long ago, Elder began, before the snow came to cover the world, people lived differently. They followed herds across endless grasslands, never staying in one place, carrying everything they owned. But then the cold came, and the herds changed their paths, and people had to adapt or die. Some moved south, seeking warmth. Others moved to the coasts, learning to take food from the sea. And some, our ancestors, moved into the mountains and learned to wait out the winter in places like this. He gestured around the cave, his movement encompassing not just the stone space but everything it represented. They learned that survival is not about fighting winter, but about understanding it, working with it, finding the rhythms that allow life to persist even in darkness and cold. They learned to sleep more in winter, to conserve energy,